Hello and welcome to Biker Babble. Today we're going to be talking about the exciting new monster for 2021. Very iconic bike for Ducati over the years. And this year they made some significant changes, including to the design. They've lost the trellis frame, which has a lot of riders very polarized in terms of opinion. I guess if you lose a major design element like that, it does polarize people. But I was excited to hear that it has the engine from the 950 Multistrada, which is a bike that I absolutely love. For some reason, I didn't end up buying the bike. When I was looking for bikes, I got the Africa Twin instead. Over the last 3 years, I've been riding it, very happy with it, very happy with what it can do. But very often my mind does go back to the Multistrada because let's face it, the Africa Twin and bikes like these, the Tiger and so on, are really good off-roading bikes. But a lot of us don't really do hardcore off-roading because it requires a certain amount of skill accumulating and we have very little time in our lives and stuff like that. So we end up using these bikes on bad roads and stuff like that. And the Multistrada is kind of a great combination in terms of it's really a road-biased bike, which has fantastic road manners. It's really nimble, etc. And it has pretty decent suspension, so it can handle all of that. So I do keep thinking about the engine and the exciting nature of that bike. And now that I heard that the Monster has the same engine, I was very intrigued. And immediately I wanted to go to Ducati and find out, thanks to my friends at Ducati for arranging the test ride so quickly for me. I went over there and this is what happened.
And now I'm pretty excited because today I'm getting to test ride a bike. That's very exciting. It's really exciting. It's a brand that gets everyone's pulses racing when you speak of motorcycles, and it's a brand called Ducati. So I don't know if you can see that really well. I'll be doing this a little later. We'll look at some of the close-ups of the bike and stuff, but this is it, the new monster, the 937cc engine or whatever, the controversial bike that does not have the trellis frame. For some reason that's become a huge issue in the world of motorcycling. But anyway, it's a black color monster. Let's get to riding it and then start talking about what it's like. Can you ride it in the city? Is it powerful? Is it exciting? Is it practical? Is it fun? Thank you so much. I'll be off. So getting on the bike, fairly easy. It's quite low to the ground. Is this like a low seat setting or something? Okay, so this is a regular kind of... So urban mode is good because I'm going to be riding in the urban jungle initially, and then we're going to be going a little further on the highway hopefully. So let's see how this goes, because this is a truly exciting bike. The reviews for this internationally have just started coming out. I saw it and I realized it's launched in India as well. So I was like, okay, let's get to riding it. My friends here at Ducati, thanks for the test ride. I'll see you soon. Oh wow, there's something about Ducatis. They kind of just make you feel pretty good right off the bat. So this is feeling quite amazing already, although I've just gone like 50 meters. And the best part is it's kind of, because it's a street bike, it kind of feels quite easy to manage this in traffic and stuff. As you guys probably know, I'm used to riding an Africa Twin, which can be a handful in street traffic like this because it has a big wheel, it's fairly heavy, it's tall. This feels really tiny in comparison and really low to the ground. And the wheel, the front wheel, is 17 inches as opposed to the 21 inches of the Africa Twin. So obviously there's going to be a huge difference. But this is a very different kind of bike, and the intention obviously is to be very nimble and sporty, and I can already tell you that it's amazingly sporty and very nimble. And what I can tell you is that going over potholes doesn't feel too bad, which is really the Achilles heel of these bikes. So obviously it's stiffly set up and it's not going to be as comfortable as an adventure bike, but having said that, it feels quite all right. It was well planted. It went over this pothole that I didn't see, kind of a manhole cover, and it still felt like it was holding firm but not disbalancing you, throwing you off, being so stiff that it felt uncomfortable. It's actually very well set up, this suspension, and that's really one of my biggest concerns when I talk about a street bike. Also, I noticed that the previous Ducatis, the Monsters, tended to have a thing with their gear and clutch, and it seems to have kind of gone away from this one. The clutch is quite easy to engage, very easy to snap into place, not really playing hard to get in terms of falling into neutral. So it really gives you a sense of great confidence. And then of course the whole setup feels quite practical for the city. Like I'm in traffic on Linking Road. It's not exactly bad traffic, but it's kind of stop and start, lots of traffic lights, etc. And I'm feeling at home on this bike. And it's got that Ducati characteristic, that engine that really wants to be revved hard. So I'm getting that potential sense while I'm riding it at 30, 25 kilometers an hour through this traffic. It's managing it fairly well, but clearly it's at home when you're able to open the throttle and kind of let go. So I'm going through Linking Road, especially to check the mannerisms of this bike in traffic. So far, pretty impressed. Very well balanced. The engine feels pretty good even at low speeds. Obviously, it doesn't feel in its comfort zone, but it feels like it can easily handle this kind of pottering about for a while. So you could take this bike out in traffic and be kind of happy with it until it finds its zone in some open areas on the highway or something. Or if you're going to Pune or something, by the time you hit the highways, you kind of manage through the traffic. But then once you hit the open roads, obviously this bike will come into its own. This monster now has the new 937cc V-twin, if I'm not mistaken. And it's the same or similar engine as the Multistrada. So that should give it some muscle, because that's a really good engine. I really enjoyed the Multistrada as well. The thing with the Multistrada is that it's a heavier bike. This is much, much lighter. I can't remember the figures, but I'll put it down on the screen. There is the green light. Now this is what they call a motorcycle. This is a great engine because it can handle the torque that is needed at the bottom end in some of these situations in traffic and still make it fairly enjoyable to ride. It's got that grunt, that Ducati grunt at the bottom end, also makes its presence known, unlike some of those super refined Japanese bikes. But what character! Clearly this is not a bike meant to be kept at 3000 RPM and used for pottering about. Neutral finding is so much easier now on this bike, and that's a huge blessing. Finding neutral used to be a big pain. The clutch and gearbox have clearly undergone some kind of change, and that's what Ducati also says. I've spotted that on some reviews. So it's a really great combination so far. The engine along with the transmission really making this interesting and fun to ride even in this traffic. Can't wait to get out on some open space. So even here, when I open the engine up and go to about 5,000 RPM, you start having fun with the bike. Let's respect the pedestrians. So even here at low speeds, when you kind of kick it into first or second gear and raise the throttle to about 5,000 RPM, it's a lot of fun. It's already doing like 60 kilometers an hour, so you don't want to be doing much more than that in traffic for sure, but it just speaks to the potential of this bike. So nimble, so easy to weave through traffic if you need to. Not always recommended, but sometimes in the slow moving traffic it's a big advantage. Can you hear that note? Simply amazing. This is why bikes like these are such items of desire, because they have that growl, they have that potential, they have some amazing engineering, they have engines that are raw and powerful and kind of make you feel like you're part of something bigger, like you're riding something very, very special. So a lot of people are polarized on this issue, the Ducati kind of feel of the engine. Some riders feel that it's kind of very rough. We have first world issues, clearly. Very important to remember that there are lots of people much less fortunate than ourselves, and we are thinking of splurging money on such expensive bikes, and that's probably a fortune of a lifetime for someone else. It's a very sobering thought, but it's important to have that understanding. So heat. Now, another thing that Ducatis are kind of known for is how hot their engines get. So while I'm sitting here, I'm kind of wearing jeans, regular jeans, not riding jeans unfortunately, and I can feel the heat a little bit. It's a hot day, probably 33, 34 degrees Celsius, 32 degrees Celsius, something like that. I'm stationary in traffic right now, and there's heat coming off the engine for sure. So it's kind of warming my legs. I wouldn't say cooking my legs, but it's definitely warming my legs. So if you're idling in traffic, sitting around, expect some heat from the engine. It is a big engine. It's a V2, so it's going to give off some heat. But I think in that department, I've been spoiled by the Africa Twin, because you sit up much higher and you're fairly protected from any kind of heating from the engine in almost all situations. So I'm kind of spoiled there. But as soon as you get moving, the heat starts dissipating here on this bike. It really feels like it's a motorcycle only after 4,000 RPM really. Before that, it's not really any fun. So you stay in low gears and rev the bike and hang on for dear life. Once again, pretty decent going over broken patches of road. and finding the neutral really easy. I can't tell you how convenient that makes city riding. Might seem like a small thing, but actually it's fairly important. Let's try this. Yeah, it's pretty good over these bumps and undulations and holes and craters and whatnot, which are part and parcel of our daily commuting lives. It's kind of handling that fairly well. Really important that any bike that you plan to ride in India do that to a certain degree. Obviously, this is a different kind of bike. It's not going to be an adventure bike. Don't expect it to soak up things like a Tiger or an Africa Twin. But if you're kind of riding it for fun and you have to go through these sections and you can't avoid them, this bike will do it. Some other bikes can get really stiff and uncomfortable in these areas, and that's always been a pet peeve of mine. You'll find all my reviews talking about this. The bike packs a punch. I can already feel that, even though I haven't really accelerated very much, but it has a huge punch in the mid-range, a lot of power, potential power lurking beneath the surface like an alligator or something. All right, so we are hitting the highway now. Let's hope there's not too much traffic. There's enough space on the seat. Wow. Talk about revving engines, tiny engines, and dangerous riding. This is the reason motorcyclists have a bad reputation. Completely illegal stuff being done on the road right here. Anyway, I was talking about the space. So there's plenty of space on the seat. That's the good thing. You know, this bike's manners over these bad roads and these flyovers where the joints meet and stuff like that are really good. And that, I can't tell you how much more accessible this bike becomes because of that. Because in India, that's really one of the big downsides to owning a sports bike or a street naked or something, because they're performance machines, and because of that they typically have hard suspensions. But if they're not malleable, if they can't soak up all these things, then they become impractical. Not so for this bike. And it has a lot of power, like I said. Just open the throttle and you will sail past anybody else. So I was talking also about the feel of the Ducati engine. It polarizes riders. Some riders love the feel of the engine, the grunt, the vibrations, the power that you can feel through the motorcycle because of the character of the engine. And some others prefer the Japanese refinement, the quiet, the hum, and don't particularly care for this throbbing of the Ducati engine. But I have to say, I kind of enjoy it because it doesn't vibrate for no reason at all. It vibrates because there's an engine there that's extremely powerful and has a lot of torque and acceleration on offer. And so it combines together to make a great riding experience. And in traffic, this is like really easy. The seating position is very comfortable. I'm not too far forward. I'm not really leaning on the handlebars. It's very nimble. The braking is excellent. So I kind of know that I can pull up to any car and be ready for any exigencies. The other thing is it kind of feels nimble and small, but it doesn't feel tiny. It doesn't feel insignificant. It kind of has a certain amount of presence on the road even while you're seated on the bike. And you kind of feel like you're relatively tall. Even though the seat isn't too high, I could very, very comfortably reach the ground with both my feet. I'm 5'11". And this bike kind of really is delivering on all fronts, really. It's just that in this traffic, you really don't get much leeway to kind of throw it about. So let's turn back and see if we find an open section of road somewhere else. The gearbox is definitely very slick, and this used to be a problem in the earlier Monster that I've ridden. In fact, even on the earlier Multistrada. And it's absolutely fantastic right now. They've kind of not just addressed it, they've made it a strength. And so when I'm weaving through traffic, if I do that on the Africa Twin, you can kind of do this on any motorcycle really, but when I do it on the Africa Twin or some other heavy bike, it kind of feels like a bit of an effort. You have to focus on the traffic, on the movements of the bike, etc. I mean, here on this bike, you really kind of, it feels natural. You don't really have to look at where you're going per se to kind of calculate what the bike will do, etc. It's just feels natural to kind of tilt in one direction, and the other direction I'm counterbalancing because it's traffic and I'm going relatively slowly. And it's just so easy to maneuver this bike. It'll do exactly what you tell it to. It feels like a little scooter. Really, a scooter with 110 horsepower or whatever it is. Turning around. So that's pretty much it actually. I mean, the bike is really good. does its job really well. It's got a gem of an engine. It's really nimble. It's comfortable, even on roads such as ours. So I can imagine that if you're going on a straight highway, it'll be like really well balanced, well poised. Best part is if there's any emergencies or something and you have to go over some pothole that you didn't see at the last minute, you're not going to be thrown off the bike. It's not that stiff. Okay, let's make way for this ambulance. So I did the review of the CB500X a short while ago, and I was talking about how that bike is comfortable at whatever speed. It's fairly refined and very comfortable at any speed. Even at 30, 40, it kind of feels all right. And if you're speeding and kind of overtaking at about 90, 100, 110, it's also fine on the highway. Feels at home in both places. This guy or this lady, as the case may be, just wants to go really fast, and he feels kind of comfortable at about 5,000 RPM. So if you keep the bike in that range, if you go down to about 3,000 RPM, it kind of doesn't feel like a fantastic ride. It doesn't feel like it belongs there. And that's okay, because even in such traffic, which is fairly dense traffic moving kind of slowly on the highway, I'm able to keep the revs to about 4,000 fairly easily in lower gears. But you'll have to keep to the lower gears. It's not like you can throw it into third gear and just kind of potter along. It's not that kind of bike. This bike is a sports bike. It'll want to be ridden like one. So it's for enthusiasts for sure. Not for the casual biker who doesn't want an interesting riding experience but kind of prefers a commuter or just pottering about town. So do keep that in mind. It's a fairly performance-oriented bike that needs a rider that loves performance, wants to keep this in the right power band at the right RPMs and downshifts at the right time. So that's really how this bike rides well. That's the character of the bike. But that's what I love. When you buy bikes, you either buy them for commuting or you buy them for sport. This is a sport bike. The seating position on this bike is also fairly comfortable. I'm not really wearing knee pads and stuff, unfortunately, which I should be, but I was on my way elsewhere. And still, so if you put on knee pads, it would test the position a little bit more because they press up against your knee and you kind of start feeling the discomfort if there is any to be felt. So here I can't testify to that, but it generally feels quite comfortable for my height. It feels, the knee doesn't really start feeling cramped. It's kind of a high peg position. It's kind of a little bit rear set, but it's very, very comfortable. I'm not really feeling like I'm leaning on the handlebars. I'm kind of gripping the tank quite easily, and I could just, kind of rest my hands very lightly on the handlebars and ride this bike for hours. Obviously, it's not going to be as comfortable, once again, as a purpose-built bike like the Multistrada. But you could do long rides on this bike, no problem. Wow, fourth gear, 4,000 RPM. That's really where the fun's at. The red line on this bike seems to be at 10,000 RPM, by the way. But this is a new bike, a demo bike, so I guess one shouldn't really be revving it that hard. But let's go up the rev range a little bit. 6,000, I think there might be a limiter there. Not really sure. No, there's no limiter. Oh wow, this is where you start having some fun. At 7,000 RPM, this bike gets a life of its own. A new life of its own. It's fun even at 4,000 or so, 5,000, but at 7,000 is clearly where the fun starts at the next level. It's such a fun bike. It's such a great bike. I love the fact that it has a sizable engine now, which kind of feels big, mature. Kind of feels like one of the big boys. All right, we have to navigate this as well. It's a really light bike, and that obviously helps its case a lot. Makes it very nimble, very responsive, very easy to ride, feels great, and that lightness helps every aspect of the riding. But despite being light, doesn't feel skittish at all. Well planted, well balanced. Rubber is excellent. The tires really gripping the road, really sticking very well. It's really a fabulous experience, actually. What else could I say? That's what else I could say. It's when you open the throttle that you understand the potential of this bike. So this bike is not a hoot like I've often described some other bikes. It's not a hoot, it's exciting adventure. It's not. A hoot is like for junior bikes. This bike is serious stuff. This is a bike you should be doing track days with. Wow. Wow, wow. Open road. Meant for the open road. I'm not sure if you can hear the sound of the bike through this helmet and the mic that I've got inside the helmet. But if you can, oh boy, it is absolutely fabulous. You know, this bike is so much fun that I want to take it out again on the open road and let loose the throttle. I've only got a glimpse, a tiny glimpse of what this bike is capable of. If you really want to enjoy it or savor it or even test it properly, you have to take this onto an open stretch of road, or actually you have to take this to the track. But if you can't take it to the track responsibly, if you take it on an open stretch of road within the speed limits, but open up the revs to 6,000 or 7,000 in the lower gears, you'll be hitting like legal speeds almost immediately. But even at that range, you can really enjoy the bike's character. It really is a bike that likes to rev hard, go fast, and in that speed is where it displays its true prowess. It's really planted at that speed, inspires so much confidence. It feels at that speed like much lesser bikes would feel at half that speed, or even less than that. So it's kind of, that's what you get in a performance bike. It's not really meant for pottering around. It won't feel like a fantastic bike to own if you're going to commute on it and go through traffic and stuff like that. It's going through traffic because it has to, and it'll do it. It's absolutely fine. Can manage, it's managing pretty well, but it's not going to be the most comfortable bike in that kind of scenario, and it's not meant to be. It's like asking a tiger to kind of, and by tiger I mean the animal, to be comfortable, you know, in the city. I mean, its natural environments and natural instinct are different. It belongs in a different place, and so does this monster. But that's the thing, it can handle the mixed riding that are typical of Indian conditions, but it's really meant for these long rides you do on the weekends. You kind of get a great riding experience because you're going on to some open roads where you're able to open the throttle a little bit and then get onto the right rev range and kind of enjoy the potential of the bike. Because at that speed, at those speeds on the highway, this bike will actually keep you very safe because it will be very planted, very well in control. It has fantastic braking, suspension, tires, the whole design of the bike. The engine really responds beautifully. So it's kind of meant to be in that zone, right, where it's really performing at a high level and performing very comfortably at that high level. So a lot of bikes can go fast, but it's not about the speed. This bike is about going fast and keeping you in control and keeping you well planted and having you enjoy that experience without seeming like you're risking a few things every time you open the throttle. So that's really what this bike is about. Speed breakers, no problem. That's the other thing. Like the Duke 790, this bike also has a fairly high amount of ground clearance, unlike a lot of sports bikes that come from other stables. And so that makes it very practical to ride in India. It's one of the defining things about the Monster as compared to, let's say, a Ninja or something where the ground clearance is so low that you're worried about hitting speed breakers every time you go over them. No such problems here. So going slowly does cause the heat bit to kind of start affecting your legs, your inner thighs right now, for example, which are touching against the tank. Just below that sits the engine, and the engine is emanating some heat, which I can definitely feel. If you're riding this bike, ride with riding pants, with Kevlar protection, for sure. Braking is also excellent. Excellent braking, well in control. You feel confident stopping literally on a dime. Progressive, doesn't scare you. So I think the important thing is you have to ask yourself why you want this bike. Like any bike, but particularly this bike. You have to ask yourself, what do I want from this bike? The clutch shift, by the way, is really light, quite easy, very easy to engage. I've been riding it for, I don't know, half an hour, 45 minutes. No problems whatsoever. And remember, I ride the Africa Twin, so I have no clutch. So it's not like I'm used to pressing a clutch and have strong muscles in my left hand or whatever it is. So not really noticed it so far. It's quite light, the pull, very precise, feels pretty good. So coming back to the question, why do you want this bike? You have to ask yourself this, because if you have to ride this bike over long distances, let's say you're the type of guy that wants to go to Pune once in a while on a weekend ride, and for you it's about the weekend ride. It's about going through the Ghats and stopping and having a cup of tea somewhere and then landing up in Pune and, you know, kind of going meeting a friend or something, or maybe having lunch and then kind of sauntering back, and you kind of enjoy the entire experience. Or if you go somewhere to a lakeside somewhere near Nasik or whatever, or Igatpuri or something like that, if you do these weekend rides and you kind of want to experience the weekend in itself, apart from the bike also, you want to go to all these nice places like lakesides or I don't know, camping grounds or something like that, then maybe you're better off with an adventure bike. If you only want to ride in the city, kind of commute to office and do the occasional ride here and there, that's when you'd be looking at a street bike. And in that case, you'd want a bike that responds well on the highway but manages fairly well in traffic, because you're doing a fair amount of traffic on your commute or whatever. So that's another case scenario. And so in that case, you'd probably want a more versatile bike that's also comfortable in the traffic. This bike is kind of purpose built to being an exciting bike when you're racing at 6,000, 5,000 RPM and past that, and even over that. So I would like kind of look at this if I'm doing an occasional track day, using this bike for commutes between cities where the roads are fairly quick and relatively empty and relatively safe. So if I'm doing a Jaipur to Delhi, or I'm doing a Chandigarh to Delhi where the roads are kind of open, and I'm going early morning where it's kind of light traffic and stuff like that, and the traffic's very quick, then this would be pretty good. But if I'm going to ride in Bombay and then do the occasional ride here and there, then this bike may not be as versatile as some other bikes. It's really good at what it does at one end of the spectrum, and it manages at the other end, but it's not phenomenal. It's not super comfortable. It's not something that feels great at that kind of, in those circumstances, at those kind of speeds, those RPMs, all of that. Finally, there's a third scenario. You love motorcycling and you ride only for the pleasure of riding, and you find stretches of tarmac so that you can go riding and have fun riding. Then you can put up with any idiosyncrasies whatsoever, or any atypical, uncomfortable elements of a bike, because the real purpose of the bike is to be a performance machine. In that case, I think this bike is at the top of the list. But having said that, I don't want to be unfair, because this bike also feels fairly comfortable in most scenarios. It's just that it's not built for these kind of purposes. It's built for excitement, it's built for fun, it's built for nice, beautiful roads where you can, for a stretch, enjoy some high RPMs, enjoy decent speeds. It's built for nice corners, sweeping corners where you can enjoy the sensation of motorcycling, cornering. If you're keen on motorcycling and you want something really nice, I can recommend this bike really strongly. As long as you're willing to put up with the fact that it's not going to be the best bike in the city traffic, it's going to overheat a little bit. By the way, the heat's not crazy, it's just a little bit of heat. I think we're getting really very choosy these days with bikes, because things used to be pretty tough earlier on, and things are getting just much better on all bike models as things get upgraded. So these are like just tiny little things really. My legs are getting pretty warm, but pretty warm. They're not getting hot. They're not feeling like they're going to get burnt, which sometimes used to be the case in some of these older motorcycles with big engines that we've ridden. So it's perfectly compatible with all of the purposes that you have to encounter in the city, but just not so phenomenal at it as it is in the area where its domain lies, which is speed, high RPM, excitement, fun, fantastic riding, all that stuff. So that's what it is. A genuine Ducati sports bike in the form of a street bike, the Monster. Lots of legacy, some of which it is left behind with the trellis frame, but it feels great. It feels as nimble as the previous Monster. It feels definitely much more powerful. It definitely feels like it has greater reserves of power, of torque. I would even say refinement in terms of this engine. Another area where it'll feel pretty good is if you're kind of cruising on this bike along the highway going from one city to another or something like that. It feels pretty good at about 5,000 RPM. You're kind of opening its legs a little bit, but not really letting loose. And it's cruising pretty comfortably, great suspension. You can kind of ride it all day long and get somewhere in pretty decent comfort. And typically that's the kind of domain that semi-adventure or sports touring bikes enjoy, and I think it can compete very well in that area. In fact, I wouldn't say compete very well, I think it would be top of the class in that area really. So you might think of this as a street bike for the city, but I would actually consider it really strongly for a sports touring bike, because it will get you all the thrills of riding, but also get you comfortably from one place to another, long days over long stretches, very, very easily. Not really mad throttling, but kind of keeping it at cruising speeds and enjoying a nice, lazy, but still exciting ride as you go from city to city on your adventures. That kind of rounds it up, actually, mostly. So the best part is that I've been riding this bike for, I think, almost the best part of an hour, and I feel perfectly comfortable in the seat. I'm not feeling like my legs are cramped, I'm not feeling like my hips are locked up. It's very comfortable. Like I said, I'm 5'11", and so for my height, it's very, very comfy. I'm guessing up to about 6'1", you should be perfectly fine on this bike. And for shorter riders, it's not like the seat's very high, so it kind of is the best of both worlds. You know, once you get the hang of this engine and the speeds and the RPM combinations, it really is quite easy to ride even in this traffic, flowing traffic. Stop start is kind of the place where I would say it's a little bit out of place, but other than that, feels just great. So I'd say if you have traffic that's flowing at about 50k an hour, 50 kmph, you're fine, you'd love it, because you'd be able to keep it in the right areas, the right RPMs and so on, and enjoy the riding. And as soon as you get an open stretch, you know you're going to have a tremendous amount of fun. So that's not too bad for a motorcycle. That's a high performing sports bike in the disguise of a street bike. So all in all, considering everything, the pliant suspension, the ground clearance, the beautiful engine, the fantastic transmission now, the practicality of the bike overall in terms of its riding in flowing city traffic, and of course the most important thing, its potential in some amazing situations at the top end in terms of high RPMs, really enjoying the performance of this motorcycle in situations where you have some space, you can open the throttle, stretch its legs, then it just comes into its own. I don't think there's any competition for this bike in that area, at least that I can think of, because combined with performance is the character, the practicality, all of that. So it feels completely in its zone when you're going really quickly. When you're going at speeds that would scare you on other bikes, it feels very planted, very safe, very in control, and really cruises beautifully also at high speeds, because you can keep it in a very easy kind of zone for its engine. This engine likes to be revved. This is a performance engine that likes to be in the zone all the time. It doesn't want to potter about, and it does a pretty good job of pottering about if there's free-flowing traffic, let's say going at about 40 to 50 kilometers an hour at least. If it's slower than that, then it kind of heats up and feels a little bit grumpy, but that's only to be expected. I think overall, just an amazing bike this time. So this is really it. Pretty awesome bike actually. So overall, let me just sum up what I felt throughout the ride that I told you guys. It's a phenomenal bike, really great engine now. This whole combination of this engine in a monster kind of setting, it's actually the Multistrada engine, the 937 V-twin. I'll put all the power figures down there. It's got a beautiful feel about it. It's a really excellent engine. I've enjoyed it on the Multistrada already earlier, and I was glad to hear that it was on this bike. So it feels really good. So that's there. That's kind of a lot of fun. So that engine combined with this new transmission, which is just so slick and so amazing, I just absolutely loved it. Completely transformed for me the riding experience of the Monster. The previous Monsters were also pretty good, but they definitely had a problematic clutch sometimes. Especially finding neutral was a real pain, and actually now it makes such a difference riding, especially in stop-start traffic, that it's absolutely beautiful. The other thing is how it's designed, just the handlebars, the width is kind of perfect. It does feel, for me, because I ride adventure bikes and I ride an Africa Twin, it does feel a little bit small compared to obviously an adventure bike, but that's, you know, obviously just the genre of the bike. That's obviously just the format of the bike. This is a street bike. It's not meant to be an adventure bike, which have high seats and big suspension and all that. And speaking of suspension, it's just got an incredible suspension. Very pliant, yet totally in control. I don't think I've enjoyed any street bike so much in terms of how its suspension is set up with the bike, with the weight of the bike, with the tires. The tires are excellent, they really grip beautifully. So it kind of feels really like a performance bike, like a racetrack bike that's in the guise of a street bike. Also the aesthetics and the legacy, you can't ignore that. So it's just absolutely phenomenal because it looks so great. Look at the logo here, right? It kind of feels pretty amazing. This is the black color. There's also two other colors, one red, of course, Ducati, but there's also something called gray or something like that. So it just feels, the legacy of this bike just obviously adds to the entire charm. And there's also the legacy of the engine itself, right? In the sense that Ducati engines have always been these V-twins, really powerful ones, which kind of really pull strongly. And so they have this characteristic clatter, or whatever you might call it, and throbbing that some people, it polarizes people. Some people hate it, some people absolutely love it. I am leaning towards the latter category. So I would say this bike is an absolute two worlds colliding. There it is again. Such a privilege for us to be talking about and thinking about such expensive bikes. And there's another world out there which is kind of having to deal with other realities and still stay happy. He didn't want to be photographed for some reason. Oh, there he's hiding. Okay, so that kind of helps me wrap it up. Nice bike, great combination, fantastic in terms of how it puts everything together, and it would really be a treat to get something like this. But you have to ask yourself one question: what kind of bike do I want? What do I want to do? For me, I think the only problem with this kind of bike, and that's why I was testing it out, is that it helps me determine that what I really want is to be riding long distances and enjoying motorcycling on the open highways rather than within the city. Because in the city, you're always going to meet traffic, you're always going to go stop and start, and it's not really any fun with these kind of performance bikes, or even other bikes that are good at doing all of that kind of stuff. But really, motorcycling is about, I've mentioned this before, having the metaphorical wind in your hair and kind of getting away and escaping. And you want to go to other landscapes, other corners of the country, and other parts that you don't frequent that often. Even if you're going on the weekend somewhere, you want to take it to a lakeside, you want to take it to some kind of hillside or whatever it is. And for that, it's really better to get a bike that is kind of an adventure bike, or at least halfway there, like the CB500X or whatever. Of course, these bikes have a different kind of thrill altogether, and the thrill of this bike to me would really be to take it out on a racetrack, because the kind of performance it has, probably the full potential cannot be exploited on the roads here anyway. Even though some people try, it's the most dangerous thing to do and not very responsible biking. This, by the way, is a treat for you guys, because this is the Multistrada V4, and that ride I shall try on another day. It's a 30 lakh bike in India, so I'm not sure many people can afford this, but it's got the V4 engine and looks absolutely stunning. So that ride for another day. Let's say goodbye for today. See you.
Thanks for watching Biker Babble. I'd love to hear from you. If you have any comments, put them in the comments box below. I'd love to hear your suggestions. Thanks for checking out this video, and I hope to see you here back again soon.